Danny Carter wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked out at the purple field stretching before him. 3 years ago, he had been a simple mechanic in Ohio. Now he stood on a planet 40 light-years from Earth, growing crops that would feed the human colony in the galaxy. The sky above 442b was a soft orange, with 2 small moons visible even in the daylight. The air smelled different here, somehow, like flowers that had no name yet. Everything on this world was new. Everything was waiting to be discovered. His wife Laura was out in the eastern field, collecting samples of the grain they had planted last season. She wore her old brown hat, the one she had brought all the way from Earth. Danny could see her small figure moving between the tall purple stalks, bending down now and then to check the soil. He loved watching her work. She had been a veterinary nurse back home, caring for animals at a small clinic in their town. When the colony program opened applications, she had been the first to sign up. Danny had followed because he could not imagine life without her. The colony was small, just 300 people spread across a valley surrounded by dense forests. The trees here were not green but deep blue and violet, with leaves that glowed faintly at night. Scientists said the forest was safe. They had found no large predators in the area. The biggest creatures they had seen were small rodent-like animals that ran away at the first sight of humans. Danny turned to check on the water pumps behind the house. They had been making strange noises all morning, and he needed to fix them before the dry season arrived. He walked to the small shed, grabbed his tools, and knelt beside the machine. That was when he heard it. A sound came from the forest edge. It was low and deep, like thunder rolling across the ground. Danny stood up slowly and turned toward the trees. The purple stalks in the field began to sway, but there was no wind. Something was moving through the crops. Danny's heart began to beat faster. He squinted, trying to see what was causing the movement. Then the creature emerged from the field, and Danny felt his blood turn to ice. It was massive, at least 12 feet tall at the shoulder. It had 6 legs, each one thick and powerful, ending in hooves that looked like they could crush stone. Its body was covered in dark armor plates, like a horse wearing the shell of a beetle. Bright blue stripes ran down its sides, glowing softly in the afternoon light. But it was the head that terrified Danny the most. The creature had a long face, similar to a horse, but with a sharp horn rising from its forehead, and a mouth filled with teeth that did not belong on any plant-eater. Its eyes were large and amber-colored, and they were looking directly at Laura. Laura had not seen it yet. She was still bent over the soil, writing notes in her little book. Danny tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. He forced himself to breathe and then shouted her name as loud as he could. Laura looked up at him, confused. She waved and smiled, not understanding the terror in his voice. Danny pointed behind her, his hand shaking. She turned around slowly. The creature was less than 50 feet away from her now. It had stopped moving and was standing perfectly still, its glowing eyes fixed on the small human woman before it. Danny ran. He did not think about weapons or safety protocols or anything the Colony Council had taught them. He just ran toward his wife, his legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. The distance between them felt like miles. Laura did not move. She stood frozen, staring up at the beast towering over her. Danny could see her trembling, her little book falling from her hands into the dirt. The creature took another step forward. The ground shook beneath its weight. Danny was still too far away. He would never reach her in time. He thought of all the things he had never said to her. All the mornings he had not told her how beautiful she looked. All the nights he had fallen asleep without saying he loved her. Now he was going to watch her die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Danny fell to his knees in the middle of the field. His legs had given out beneath him. Tears blurred his vision as he watched the creature lower its massive head toward Laura. This was the end. This was how they would die on a world far from home, killed by a monster no one had ever seen before. The colony scientists had been wrong. The forest was not safe. Something had been hiding in there all along, waiting for the right moment to strike. Danny closed his eyes. He could not watch. He waited for the screams, for the horrible sounds of his wife being torn apart. But the sounds never came. Instead, he heard something else. A soft sound, almost gentle, like a giant animal exhaling slowly. Danny opened his eyes. The creature had not attacked Laura. It had lowered its head all the way to the ground and was pressing its nose against her shoulder, gently, the way a dog might nuzzle its owner. Laura was still frozen, her eyes wide with shock, but she was alive. She was completely unharmed. Danny stared at the scene before him, unable to understand what he was seeing. This made no sense. The creature was clearly a predator. Those teeth were designed for tearing flesh. Those legs were built for chasing down prey. Everything about it screamed danger and death. But it was not attacking. It was not even threatening. It was just standing there, its head bowed, its glowing eyes looking up at Laura with an expression Danny could only describe as pleading. Slowly, carefully, Danny rose to his feet. He began walking toward them again, his steps quiet and careful. The creature turned its head to look at him, but it did not move away. It did not bare its teeth or make any threatening sounds. As Danny got closer, he noticed something he had not seen before. The creature was favoring its back left leg, keeping weight off it as much as possible. And along its side, between the armor plates, there was a wound. It was deep and dark, with black lines spreading outward from it like cracks in glass. The creature was hurt, it was sick, and somehow it had come to them for help. Danny stopped beside his wife and put his hand on her shoulder. She was shaking badly, but she was breathing. She was okay. Together, they looked up at the alien beast that had appeared from the forest. And for the first time since coming to this strange new world, Danny realized that they understood absolutely nothing about what lived here. Their adventure was just beginning. Laura could feel her heart pounding so hard that she thought it might break through her chest. The creature's nose was still pressed against her shoulder, warm and surprisingly soft despite its terrifying appearance. She could smell it now, a strange scent like wet earth and copper. Danny stood beside her, his hand gripping her arm. Neither of them moved. Neither of them dared to breathe too loudly. The creature let out another long breath, and Laura felt the warmth of it wash over her face. Up close, she could see the pain in its amber eyes. This was not a predator looking for food. This was an animal suffering, desperate, looking for someone who could make the pain stop. Laura had seen that look before. She had seen it in dogs hit by cars, in cats with broken legs, in horses with colic. It was the universal expression of a creature that had reached the end of its strength and was begging for help. Something inside her changed in that moment. The fear did not disappear completely, but it moved aside to make room for something else. Compassion. The same feeling that had made her become a veterinary nurse in the first place. Slowly, very slowly, Laura raised her hand. Danny grabbed her wrist. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "It's hurt," Laura whispered back. "Look at it, Danny. It's not trying to kill us. It needs help. It could bite your arm off. It could have killed me already. It didn't." Laura gently pulled her wrist free from Danny's grip. She raised her hand again and moved it toward the creature's face. Her fingers were shaking, but she forced them to stay steady. The creature watched her hand approach. Its amber eyes tracked every movement, but it did not pull away. It did not open its mouth or show its teeth. Laura's fingers touched the side of its muzzle. The skin was warm and rough, like thick leather. The creature closed its eyes and leaned into her touch, the way a tired dog might lean against its owner's leg. Laura let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. "It's okay," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "You're okay. We're going to help you." Danny watched his wife with a mixture of fear and amazement. This was the woman he had married, the woman who had once walked into a burning barn to save 3 horses. She had never been able to see an animal in pain without trying to help. He had known this about her. He had just never expected to see it tested on a 12-foot alien monster. The creature slowly lowered itself to the ground, folding its 6 legs beneath its body. It sat before Laura like a massive dog waiting for commands. From this position, its wounded flank was clearly visible. Laura moved around to examine the injury. The wound was bad, worse than she had thought from a distance. It was about 2 feet long and several inches deep. The edges were blackened and swollen, and dark veins spread out from it across the creature's skin. "This is infected," Laura said, "badly infected, and there's something inside it. Look at those black lines. Something is spreading through its body." Danny forced himself to look. He was not a medical person, but even he could see that this was serious. Whatever was in that wound was slowly killing the creature. "Can you help it?" he asked. Laura bit her lip. "I don't know. I'm a veterinary nurse, not a surgeon. And this is an alien species. I don't know anything about its biology. I could kill it by accident just by trying to help." The creature turned its head to look at her. Those amber eyes met hers, and Laura felt something pass between them. Understanding, trust. This creature had come to her knowing the risks. It had chosen to trust a strange little being from another world because it had no other choice. "I have to try," Laura said. "Go to the house and bring me the medical kit, the big one, and clean water, lots of clean water." Danny hesitated for only a moment before running toward their home. Laura stayed with the creature, her hand resting on its neck, speaking soft words of comfort, even though she knew it could not understand her. When Danny returned, his arms were full of supplies. He had brought everything he could find: bandages, antiseptic, surgical tools, even the emergency antibiotics they had been saving for a real crisis. Laura got to work. She cleaned the wound as best she could, wincing every time the creature flinched in pain. But it never tried to hurt her. It never even growled. It just lay there, trusting her completely, letting her work. As she cleaned deeper into the wound, Laura found the source of the infection. It was a parasite about the size of her fist, with dozens of thin tendrils that had spread throughout the creature's flesh. It was black and pulsing, and it looked like something from a nightmare. "What is that thing?" Danny asked, his face pale. "I don't know," Laura replied, "but it's killing this animal. I need to get it out." The surgery took 3 hours. Laura worked carefully, cutting away the infected tissue, tracing each tendril back to the main body of the parasite. The creature lay still through the whole thing, only flinching when the pain became too much. Finally, Laura pulled the last piece of the parasite free. It came out with a wet sound that made Danny gag. She threw it onto the ground and watched as it twitched twice and then went still. The creature let out a long, low sound. It was not quite a moan and not quite a sigh. It was the sound of relief, the sound of pain finally starting to fade. Laura stitched the wound closed with steady hands. She applied antiseptic and wrapped the whole thing in clean bandages. It was rough work, not as good as what she could have done in a proper clinic, but it was the best she could manage. When she was finished, she sat back and wiped the sweat from her forehead. Her hands were covered in dark blood and her clothes were ruined, but she was smiling. "There," she said softly, "that's the best I can do. Now we wait and see." The creature lifted its head and looked at her. Then, slowly, deliberately, it pressed its nose against her cheek in something that looked very much like a kiss. Danny watched his wife laugh for the first time since the creature had appeared. And despite everything, despite the fear and the confusion and the complete impossibility of the situation, he found himself smiling too. They had no idea what they had just started. They had no idea how much this moment would change everything. All they knew was that they had helped a creature in need, and somehow, against all odds, it had worked. The creature would need a name, Laura decided. She would call it Storm, after the crackling pattern of its bioluminescent stripes. It seemed fitting for a beast that had thundered into their lives and turned everything upside down. Storm closed its eyes and rested its head on the ground, finally at peace. And Danny and Laura sat beside it, watching the orange sky slowly turn to pink as the sun began to set on the strangest day of their lives. The news spread through the colony like fire. Within hours of Danny's first report to the council, everyone on 442B knew about the creature that had walked out of the forest. The reactions were not what Danny and Laura had hoped for. Council leader Blake arrived at their homestead the next morning with 6 armed guards. She was a tall woman with hair and cold eyes, a former military commander who had been chosen to lead the colony because she did not make emotional decisions. "You should have reported this immediately," said, staring down at Storm, who was still resting on the ground near the house. "First contact protocol is clear. Unknown alien life forms must be contained and studied." "She was dying," Laura replied, standing between and the creature. "There was no time for protocols." "It corrected. We don't know if it has a gender. We don't know anything about it. That's the point. For all we know, you've just released a deadly pathogen into our colony by exposing yourself to its blood." "I've been exposed for almost 20 hours now. I feel fine." "You feel fine for now. These things can take time." Turned to her guards. "Prepare the containment cage. We're taking this thing back to the science center." Storm lifted its head at the sound of his voice. Its amber eyes focused on the woman, and a low rumble emerged from its chest. The sound was not aggressive, but it was warning enough. The guards stepped back, their hands moving to their weapons. "If you try to cage her, she'll fight," Danny said. "And those guns won't stop something that big. You'll just make her angry." His eyes narrowed. "Then what do you suggest?" "Let us keep her. Let us study her. Laura knows more about animal behavior than anyone in your science team. If this creature is intelligent, and I think she is, then we need to earn her trust. You won't do that by locking her in a cage." The standoff lasted for several minutes. Storm never took her eyes off, and the guards never lowered their weapons. Finally, made a decision. "Fine, you have 1 week, but I'm posting guards around your homestead. If that thing makes any aggressive moves toward any colonist, we put it down. Understood?" Danny nodded. It was not ideal, but it was better than the alternative. And her guards left, but they did not go far. Danny could see them setting up a perimeter around the farm, their weapons ready. The message was clear. One wrong move and Storm would die. Over the next few days, Laura dedicated herself to understanding Storm. She observed everything the creature did, taking notes on its behavior, its diet, its sleep patterns. She spoke to it constantly, using the same calm voice she had used with frightened animals back on Earth. Storm seemed to enjoy the attention. She followed Laura around the homestead like a giant dog, watching everything she did with obvious curiosity. When Laura sat down to rest, Storm would lower herself to the ground nearby and rest her massive head on her front legs. On the 3rd day, something remarkable happened. Laura was explaining to Danny how she thought Storm communicated, pointing at the glowing stripes on the creature's sides. Storm watched her gesture, then looked at her own flank. The stripes began to pulse in a rhythmic pattern, blue lights chasing each other across her body. "She understood me," Laura breathed. "She's trying to show us how it works." Danny watched in amazement as the patterns became more complex. Storm was demonstrating, teaching them the way her species shared information. It was not language exactly, but it was communication. Real, intentional communication. That night, Laura made another discovery. She had been examining Storm's wound, checking for signs of infection, when she noticed something odd about the creature's eyes. Storm was not just watching her work. Storm was studying her hands, observing the way she used her fingers, the way she held her tools. "She's learning from us," Laura told Danny later as they sat on the porch watching the 2 moons rise. "She's not just an animal, Danny. She's intelligent, maybe as intelligent as we are, just different. If that's true, then what does she want? Why did she come to us? Laura thought about it for a long moment. I think she was testing us. Her species must have been watching the colony ever since we arrived. They wanted to know what kind of creatures we were. When Storm got hurt, she decided to find out the truth. Would we help her or would we kill her? That's a hell of a gamble. It was a gamble she was willing to take, and we passed the test. On the 5th day, the guards reported movement in the forest. Danny grabbed his binoculars and climbed onto the roof of their house for a better view. What he saw made his heart stop. There were more of them, dozens of creatures like Storm, moving through the trees at the edge of the farm. Their eyes glowed in the shadows, blue and amber points of light watching the colony from the darkness. Was on the radio within minutes, demanding answers. What is happening? Are they going to attack? I don't know, Danny replied honestly. But I don't think so. They're just watching. They want to see what we do with Storm. Laura walked out into the field, toward the forest. Danny shouted for her to stop, but she ignored him. Storm rose from the ground and followed her, the two of them walking side by side toward the waiting creatures. Danny held his breath. The guards raised their weapons, was screaming into the radio, ordering everyone to stand down, ordering Laura to return to the house. But Laura kept walking. When she reached the edge of the forest, she stopped. Storm moved forward a few more steps and made a sound, a deep rumbling call that echoed across the valley. The creatures in the forest responded with calls of their own, a chorus of voices rising and falling in complex patterns. Then, one by one, they emerged from the trees. They were all different sizes. Some were as large as Storm, others much smaller. Some had blue stripes, others had green or purple. But they all moved the same way, with the same careful grace, and they all watched Laura with the same intelligent amber eyes. Storm turned to look at Laura one more time. Then she walked forward and joined her kind, disappearing into the forest with the rest of the herd. Danny felt his heart sink. After everything they had done, Storm had chosen to leave. But then something unexpected happened. Storm stopped at the edge of the trees. She turned around and made another sound, softer this time, almost questioning. She was not leaving forever. She was asking permission to come back. Laura raised her hand in a wave. Storm's stripes pulsed once, twice, and then she was gone. Laura walked back to the house with a smile on her face. She knew, somehow, that Storm would return. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. Humanity had just taken its first step towards something none of them had ever imagined. A partnership between species on a world far from home. 3 days after Storm left with her herd, Danny woke to find the creature standing in his front yard. She was not alone. 5 other creatures stood behind her, all of them watching the small human house with patient, glowing eyes. Danny stepped onto the porch slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. Storm walked toward him and pressed her nose against his chest in greeting. Her stripes pulsed with soft blue light, and Danny felt a strange warmth spread through him. It was almost like the creature was saying hello. Laura came out a moment later, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. When she saw the visitors, she froze for a second, then broke into a wide smile. "They came back," she whispered. "I knew they would." The other creatures were smaller than Storm, and their wounds were visible even from a distance. One had a deep cut across its shoulder. Another was limping badly, favoring its front left leg. A third had the same black veins spreading across its skin that Storm had shown when she first arrived. "They're all hurt," Laura said, her smile fading. "They all have that parasite." Storm made a low sound and gestured with her head toward her companions. The meaning was clear. She had brought them here because she knew Laura could help. She was asking, in her own way, for a miracle. Danny ran to the shed and grabbed all the medical supplies they had left. It was not much after treating Storm, but it would have to be enough. Laura got to work immediately, examining each creature in turn, making notes on their injuries and planning her approach. The work took all day and most of the night. Danny helped where he could, holding tools, passing supplies, keeping the creatures calm while Laura operated. It was exhausting, terrifying work, but neither of them stopped to rest. By morning, all 5 creatures had been treated. The parasites had been removed, the wounds cleaned and bandaged. The creatures lay in a circle around the Carter homestead, resting peacefully for perhaps the first time in months. Arrived shortly after dawn with a full team of scientists and guards. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking slightly. She had never seen anything like this. "What have you done?" she asked, staring at the sleeping creatures. "I saved them," Laura replied simply. "That's what I do." "You've turned our farm into some kind of alien hospital. The council is furious. They're talking about removing you from the colony." Danny stepped forward, placing himself between and his wife. "Those creatures could have killed us at any time. They chose not to. They chose to trust us. If the council wants to throw away the most important discovery in human history because they're scared, that's their problem. But we're not going anywhere." Stared at him for a long moment. Then something in her expression changed. The hard military commander seemed to soften just a little. "The council doesn't know what to do," she admitted. "None of our protocols prepared us for this. We expected either mindless animals or hostile aliens. We never expected this." "Then maybe you need new protocols," Laura said. "These creatures are intelligent. They've been watching us since we arrived. They know more about us than we know about them. If we want to survive on this planet, we need to earn their trust, not their fear." As if to prove her point, Storm rose from the ground and walked toward. The council leader flinched, her hand moving toward her sidearm, but she did not draw it. Storm stopped in front of her and lowered her massive head until her amber eyes were level with his. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Storm exhaled slowly, her warm breath washing over his face. Her stripes pulsed with gentle light, and she made a soft sound that was almost like a purr. His hand dropped away from her weapon. Her shoulders relaxed, and something that might have been wonder appeared in her cold eyes. "It's greeting me," she said quietly, "isn't it?" Laura corrected with a smile, "And yes, she is." Reached out slowly and touched Storm's muzzle. The creature leaned into the touch, the same way she had leaned into Laura's hand days before. In that moment, something fundamental changed in the way the colony thought about the creatures in the forest. Over the following weeks, more creatures came to the Carter homestead. Word had spread through the herd somehow that the small, soft creatures in the valley could heal the sickness that had plagued them for generations. They came alone and in groups, young and old, all of them seeking help. Laura trained a team of volunteers to assist her. She taught them how to recognize the parasites, how to remove them safely, how to care for the wounds afterward. The colony's medical supplies were running low, but no one complained. This work was too important. The scientists finally got their chance to study the creatures up close, but on Laura's terms. No cages, no restraints, no invasive procedures. They observed and recorded, learning about an alien species in a way no human had ever done before. They discovered that the creatures communicated through a combination of sound, body language, and bioluminescence. They were highly social, living in family groups led by the oldest females. They were herbivores, feeding on the purple plants that grew in the forest, but they had evolved teeth and armor to defend themselves against the planet's true predators, creatures that lurked in the deep woods and only came out at night. Most importantly, they discovered that the creatures were fully intelligent. They had culture. They had history. They had been living on this planet for thousands of years, and they had been watching humanity's arrival with great interest. Danny learned all of this from Storm herself. She had become his constant companion, following him everywhere, learning to understand his words and gestures. Sometimes, in the evening, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sunset, two beings from different worlds sharing a moment of peace. "You knew, didn't you?" Danny asked her one evening. "You knew we would help you, that's why you came." Storm's stripes pulsed in a pattern Danny had come to recognize as affirmation. "Yes," she seemed to say, "I knew. But how? We could have killed you. We could have been monsters." Storm made a soft sound and pressed her head against Danny's shoulder. Her stripes pulsed again, forming a new pattern he had never seen before. It took him a moment to understand what she was showing him. She had been watching them for months before she approached. She had seen how the humans treated each other, how they helped the sick and weak, how they worked together to build their homes. She had seen Laura caring for the small animals that lived near the colony, treating their injuries and protecting them from harm. She had known what kind of creatures humans were, and she had decided to take a chance. Danny felt tears prick at his eyes. All this time they had thought they were alone on this planet, struggling to survive in an alien wilderness. But they had never been alone. They had been watched, studied, and judged by beings they never knew existed. And somehow, against all odds, they had passed the test. 6 months had passed since Storm first walked out of the forest, and the colony on 442B had transformed into something no one could have predicted. The Carter homestead, once a simple farm on the edge of the wilderness, had become the center of the most important partnership in human history. Laura stood outside the new veterinary station, watching the morning sun paint the purple fields in shades of gold and orange. Behind her, a dozen colonists were busy preparing for the day's work. They had patients waiting, creatures from the herd who had come seeking treatment for injuries and illnesses. The parasites were almost gone now. Laura's team had treated hundreds of creatures over the past months, removing the black organisms that had plagued the species for generations. The herd's population was growing stronger every day, and their gratitude was visible in everything they did. Storm appeared from around the corner of the building, her massive form moving with surprising grace. She wore a special harness that Danny had designed, fitted with pouches where she could carry supplies. She had become Laura's constant companion and helper, assisting with the medical work in ways no human had ever expected. Laura smiled and reached up to scratch behind Storm's ear. The creature leaned into the touch and made a soft, rumbling sound of contentment. "Good morning to you too," Laura said. "Ready for another busy day?" Storm's stripes pulsed with blue light, her way of saying yes. Across the valley, Danny was working with a team of colonists and creatures to clear a new field for planting. The creatures were incredibly strong, able to move rocks and fallen trees that would have taken humans days to shift. They worked alongside the colonists without complaint, seeming to enjoy the partnership. The Colony Council had officially named the creatures, in honor of the first one to make contact. The name had stuck, and now everyone used it. They had become part of daily life in the colony, as normal as the purple trees and the orange sky. But the partnership went beyond simple labor. They had begun teaching the colonists about their world. They showed them which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous. They warned them when dangerous weather was coming, their bioluminescent signals visible from miles away. They protected the homesteads at night, standing guard against the predators that lurked in the deep forest. In return, the colonists shared their own knowledge. They taught them about medicine, about tools, about the strange machines that had carried them across the stars. The creatures were endlessly curious, asking questions through their patterns of light and gesture, always wanting to learn more. Blake had changed too. The cold military commander had become one of the biggest supporters of the partnership. She visited the Carter homestead regularly, sitting with Storm and the other, learning their language of light and sound. She said it reminded her of her childhood, when she had dreamed of discovering new worlds and meeting alien species. Those dreams had faded during her years of military service, but Laura and Danny had brought them back to life. One evening, Danny sat on his porch with Storm beside him, watching the two moons rise over the purple forest. Laura was inside, reading through the day's medical reports. The colony was quiet, peaceful in a way it had never been before. "I never thought it would be like this," Danny said softly. "When we signed up for the colony program, I expected hard work and danger. I expected to spend my life fighting to survive on an alien world. I never expected to find friends here." Storm turned her massive head to look at him. Her amber eyes reflected the moonlight, and her stripes pulsed with a pattern Danny had come to recognize as affection. "You know what I mean, don't you?" Danny continued. "You understand more than we give you credit for." Storm made a soft sound and pressed her nose against his shoulder. Danny laughed and wrapped his arm around her neck as best he could. The door opened behind them, and Laura stepped out onto the porch. She sat down beside Danny and leaned against him, her eyes fixed on the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "The Council received a message from Earth today," she said quietly. "They want a full report on everything we've learned about They're talking about sending more scientists, more researchers. They want to study our partners like lab specimens." Danny felt a flash of anger. "We won't let them. These aren't animals to be poked and prodded. They're people, different from us but people all the same." "I told the same thing," she agrees. "She's sending back a message telling Earth that any researchers who come here will follow our rules. No cages, no invasive procedures. If they want to learn about they'll do it our way." Storm had been listening to their conversation. She made a sound, low and rumbling, and her stripes pulsed in a complex pattern. Danny and Laura had learned enough of the language to understand the basic meaning. "She says thank you," Laura translated. "She says her people were afraid of us when we first arrived. They didn't know if we were dangerous, but now they know the truth. We came as strangers and we became family." Danny felt tears prick at his eyes. 6 months ago, he had knelt in a field, certain he was about to watch his wife die. Now he sat with an alien creature who had become one of his closest friends, looking up at stars that no longer seemed quite so cold and distant. Somewhere out there in the galaxy, other species were watching humanity's progress on 442b. The colony's reports were being transmitted back to Earth and beyond, telling the story of what had happened here. Other intelligent species, the ones who had seeded the galaxy long before humans left their home world, were taking note. The observers had expected many things from the young human species. They had expected aggression, fear, and the usual pattern of conquest that seemed to define most intelligent life. They had been prepared to intervene if humanity proved to be just another dangerous predator spreading across the stars. But what they saw on 442b surprised them. They saw a species that reached out with open hands instead of weapons. They saw a species that looked at something terrifying and alien and saw a creature in need of help. They saw a species that could have dominated and exploited, but chose instead to heal and protect. The observers updated their reports with a new assessment. Humanity was not what they had expected. Humanity was something rare, something precious, something worth watching. Because in all their centuries of watching civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy, they had never seen a species quite like this one. A species that could look at a monster and see a friend. A species that could earn trust instead of demanding obedience. A species that understood the most powerful force in the universe was not weapons or technology or strength. It was compassion. On the porch of a small farmhouse, on a planet 40 light-years from Earth, Danny Carter held his wife's hand and watched the stars with his alien friend. And somewhere in the great darkness between worlds, the observers smiled and made a note in their records. Humanity was going to be just fine.